So our order of events, Cecilia Vicuni is going to present first, followed by Giancarlo Wapaya and Susan Briante. I have written about Cecilia's work. I've written the introduction for Cecilia's selected poems. I've introduced Cecilia like this in various venues, and yet today it feels hard to know what voice to use and how to do it. Cecilia is an artist who has been a complete model for me and for many of us who I think are here in this room and presenting today. Cecilia's work dates back to the late 60s. Her book Sabor a Mi, which we looked at in my course, and some of the students read that this week, I think we can accurately say was the first book of poetry written after the dictatorship, or after the military coup that resulted in the dictatorship in Chile in 1973. Since then, Cecilia has written, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of books of poetry, artists' books, and books that are as hard to describe as is Cecilia's entire body of work. This year, Cecilia published, she told me this week, 7 books, including this book, El Libro Venado, the Deer Book, which I was lucky enough to participate in as a translator. Cecilia works in poetry, in performance, in film. She has made hundreds of films, and when you ask her, she says, I don't know anything about filmmaking. And that is a very much the spirit which I think Cecilia thinks about expertise. But Cecilia is a filmmaker, painter, sculptor, poet, performer, and as we discussed a little bit yesterday, in her work, all of those things are happening at the same time. And I'm not sure that she distinguishes between them as being completely separate spheres of art making. My sense is that they all exist in the universe of Cecilia's work, which is so vast, wonderful, and important. The past few years has luckily and wonderfully seen a whole range of attention and support for Cecilia's work, including major solo exhibits at the Guggenheim and at the Tate and at the Venice Biennale, where she was given the Gold Medal Award for Lifetime Achievement. Cecilia Cecilia told us about her travels to Venice with her 99-year-old mother, who is also a poet as well. I have pages more of stuff to say, but I won't bore you with them. And without further ado, please welcome Cecilia Vicuni.
¿De dónde está muerto este niño? Está vivo o muerto. precious hijo mío, oyen ustedes los ruiditos adentro de mi cruz. Deben ser los ancestros de mi cruz. Hoy día voy camino al aeropuerto. Entonces estoy con una velocidad extraña. Voy alegre, lento, apurado, en un apurado jato. Slow down fast fue una frase que leí hace tiempo. César Vallejo dijo: oh débiles, oh suaves, ofendidos, que os eleváis, crecéis y llenáis de poderosos, débiles el mundo. Lo dijo en 1939, pero para él there was no time. It was a continuous present that is more present and true now than at any time in human life. Oh powerful, weak ones, softly offended ones, you rise and grow, and the world fills up with powerful, weak ones. Hace mucho tiempo escribí esta frase. Si la logro encontrar, dice así: si al principio de los tiempos la poesía fue un acto de comunión, una forma de entrar colectivamente a una visión, ahora es un espacio al que entramos, una metáfora espacial. If at the beginning of time poetry was an act of communion, a form of entering into a shared vision, now it is a space that can be entered, a spatial metaphor. And I noticed that you read a poem by Ángela where she says almost the same thing. ¿No es verdad? La poesía como un acto de comunión. A lo mejor ella y yo fuimos contemporáneas sin saberlo, ella en su isla y yo en mis cerros. Pero ella es la que está presente hoy día. Entonces, mientras preparaba esta lectura, de pronto vi esto que decía: It is 2050, and I am looking back on the year 2024, when the dark ages began, the time when the world's leaders chose cruelty and selfishness as the rule, utter cruelty and selfishness as the rule, the time when humanity chose not to listen to the suffering earth, not to listen to each other, but hear only their own will. turn on the Instagram and I suddenly become an extraterrestrial that has just landed on a planet that's about to lose all its biodiversity. But since there's no unified planetary government, no one takes notice. El relator de las Naciones Unidas, the rapporteur of the United Nations on human rights and ecological troubles, declared, perhaps yesterday, perhaps 2 days before yesterday, that there's only 2 years left before the climate catastrophe takes over fully and completely. And I remember the words I had been hearing from my companions, mis amigos, compañeros, speaking with us for these 2 days here in Chicago. And somehow, perhaps I imagined that the word composition was beginning to show up. And in Palabras language, means with. And position, coming from Latin, means composition. So a composition is being with. To position yourself, your body, your writing, with others. Composition. And I knew we had to do this book with Daniel here at my side. Because talking about world premieres, this is not a world premiere.
Yes.
We just did it in Tucson, Arizona. But this is the first time in Chicago. And so, in this book, I journey through a poem that I read originally in 1985. And it's a poem that belongs in the mind of the people who are the descendants of the creators of their poem. It belongs to the Yaqui Yoemen community of Tucson, Arizona. But I read it in 1985, and this poem set me off on a journey that continues this day. And the journey is to see what the poem wants from us as listeners, because it was born as an oral poem, or as readers. And I have given a good deal to my life to sensing what this poem wants from us. And the poem is dedicated to the deer. And you may know that the deer are going extinct now, at least in the US. They have an incurable, incomprehensible disease. But for thousands and thousands of years all over the world, the deer has been regarded as a master, as a teacher. And we will read you one of the poems that to me is the riddle of why this has to do with the mastery of the deer. And I think it has to do with the gaze, with the wet gaze of the deer that knows how to find water. And in my view, lo humano de lo humanal es su húmeda humildad. What is human about humanness is its humility. So as water, sweet water, disappears around the world, the deer and the gaze of the deer comes to mind. I think I skipped a page all my instructions to myself. This usually happens to me. But getting back to the rapporteur of the United Nations, we will know that temperatures are running wild, that salt water is disappearing fast from every continent. And therefore, this is the chance for illegal mining companies or legal mining companies to accelerate the destruction of the glaciers. And I just returned from Chile like 2 weeks ago. And I mentioned yesterday to the people that were gathered that I was going to show you a video of what I did in response to the newest mining company attempting, an American mining company, of course, attempting to own and destroy, new word, set astray, destroy the glaciers that fill the valley of Aconcagua, that in turn feeds Valparaiso and millions of people. So I called, along with some community organizations, for this event that we will show you now, for people to know what is happening with the glaciers. She wants to go. So it went too fast because it was created for Instagram, as you can tell. And the words that the glaciers are threatened by this mining company went in Spanish and very fast. And I can tell you that this strange ritual ceremony that we performed at the foot of the glaciers immediately had several, I don't know how to say it, but next morning the mining company attempted to come up to the glaciers and they found that a community organization had placed themselves on the road and they couldn't access the glaciers. And after very many circulations of this and many other images by other communities involved in the love for the glaciers, the government announced at the end of a few days that this would be protected. So since this is a seminar about translation, I wanted to bring the idea that as poems belong first in our spirit ourselves as human species. More and more people are doing the next leap, which is how the poem translated into action, into community, into effectiveness to protect the waters, the ecosystems, and people's rights. And so, before entering the year, I found in Instagram, as you see at night, I watch Instagram to get my news. And so, I encountered this, which has been not really altered by me completely, but just a tiny bit. The composition is not the loss of our humanness. The loss is this still alive? Because when you speak of loss, the mic hears it, you see. And may lose its being the mic, as we lost ourselves too. A little drone, like a toy helicopter, comes down to play with the children. Positions itself near their face, hovering like a toy, and suddenly shoots into the brain, not a bullet that enters and leaves, but a bullet that explodes inside the brain of the child. So this is the common position. We are being forced into by an interpretation of artificial intelligence as a killer of babies and children. Daniel, I think the deer responds to a vision in many poetries around the world. And some of those are represented here in this fat book. El poema es el animal hundiendo la boca en el manantial.
The poem is the animal sinking its mouth in the stream.
La idea flor.
The flower idea.
La flor es el sexo de la planta.
The flower is the plant's sex. The flower is the plant's sex.
El poema es el sexo del idioma.
The poem is language's sex.
And the book begins that way because for the Yoemen, Yaqui people, and from the Siberian ancestors of many of those who are present in this room, including me, also the deer was flower. So why is it that the flower and the deer are one? Boca y flor, los aparatos bucales de los insectos y las flores se diversificaron al mismo tiempo, chupados se compenetraban, oyéndose, se formaban, dándose gusto y placer, así flores y maestras del chupar, moscas y mosquitas, mariposas y polillas, abejas y abejitas, escarabajos y avispas, chupaban, chupándose.
Mouth and flower. The oral apparatus of the insects and the flowers diversified at the same time, sucked and sucker compenetrated each other. Hearing each other, they co-evolved. They shaped each other with pleasure. Flowers and masters of sucking, flies and mosquitoes, moths and butterflies, bees and baby bees, scarabs and wasps. They sucked, sucking each other.
Antófera electrostática, los amantes de las flores se entienden por un sonido, el ruido de su aliento.
Static electricity antophilia. The lovers of flowers understood each other through a sound, the sound of their breath.
Electrostática del poema, efecto mutuo entre los cuerpos, el polvo electrificado del poema abeja flor.
The poem's static electricity, mutual effect between the bodies, the electrified dust of the bee flower poem.
Claro de insectos adentro del gozadores del enjambre, su cuerpo velludo y sus pelos plumosos, sus alas venenosas y desiguales despegan y su larga lengua de sed humedece sus pinceles. Sus patitas se agitan en el aire y el polen atraído se sube al pincel. Canasta de pelo, canasto del polen, cepilla la pierna y lo lleva a la tira. Avión de carga, polvo de oro, néctar y polen, apis mellifera. Solo las hembras son canasteras, solo las hembras son tejedoras del polen, canastito volador.
The poem's static electricity, mutual effect between the bodies, the electrified dust of the bee flower poem. Clade of insects devoted to the hymen, lovers of the dancing swarm, its fuzzy body and its feathery hair, its poisonous uneven wings take off, and its long tongue of thirst moistens its paintbrush. Its tiny feet beat in the air, and the attracted pollen leaps up by itself to the brush. Basket of hair, basket of pollen, brushes the leg and carries it to the tibia. Cargo plane, gold dust, nectar, and pollen, apis mellifera. Only the females are basket makers. Only the females are pollen weavers. Tiny, flying basket.
Composición de la vida. Composición de la luz. The word photosynthesize means composition of light. And that's the word of the leaf. La hoja es la traductora de la luz. La clorofila es la sangre de la planta. La clorofila es un sistema cuántico. Está en varios estados a la vez. Solo así puede fotosintetizar, dijo Seth Lloyd. Y Walt Whitman dijo, una hoja de hierba no es menos que un viaje de las estrellas.
Calm position of life. Calm position of light. The leaf is the translator of light. Chlorophyll is the blood of the plant. Seth Lloyd says, chlorophyll is a quantum system. It's in many states at the same time. Walt Whitman writes, a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars.
you have been to the desert, and I suppose many of you have, and if you have seen the animals that exist in the desert, and this poem is for them, to the way I perceive the antlers. There was a video I couldn't show you today because it wasn't ready in time or on time for you. And it is that, it is believed by most people that only the male deer has the antlers. But there are some rebellious species within the deer themselves where the lady deer also has antlers. So I did a performance transforming this, which is currently perceived by many indigenous communities as being an issue for the male dancers and the male poets, to restore the notion that women deer have existed for probably millions of years. You probably know that now human language, has been determined to be almost 2 million years old, not as it was thought before. So this is for this perception of antlers that can do the following. Están en el secano, antenas de la humedad, antenas del infinito, los sedientos de arcoíris sienten la lluvia en un valle distante, el brote los llama.
There in the dry land, antennas of humidity, antennas of infinity, the thirst of the rainbow. They feel the rain in a distant valley. The sprout calls them.
I wrote that poem a long time ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago. But when I read it now, it has a different meaning, because as water is disappearing, we are the ones that are going to have to go back to developing antennas to feel where the humidity, if we want for there to be human life. And so now we're saying goodbye, and this is the last poem. And it's a poem that was in the book and out of the book, kicked in, because it's a troublemaker. Típico del forma robotoso. El cuanta de la indiada. El indio roto, pobre y descrestado, habiendo anticipado la ciencia actual, el cuanta del enredo molecular, habiendo sostenido esa imagen con su vida, generación tras generación, la imagen de las lluvias y flores, soñando las unas el canto de las otras, cada una recordando el lugar de su contrapartida, sabiendo que en el espacio-tiempo todo es intercambio recíproco, relación, habiéndolo sostenido por milenios, ahora son borrados, destruidos por haberlo sostenido. Llegaremos a tiempo a reencarnar esa visión en la tierra, como lo hizo la indiada Yoemi, Wisharika, Raramuri. Llegaremos a honrar como especie el sueño de la vida, soñando su transformación.
The quantum of the Indian. The broken Indian, after having anticipated the actual science, the quantum of molecular entanglement, having sustained that image with his life, generation after generation, the image of the rains and flowers, each dreaming the song of the other, remembering the place of its counterpart, knowing that in space-time everything is reciprocal exchange, relation, having sustained it for millennia, now they are erased, destroyed for having held on to this view. Will we arrive on time to embody that vision on Earth as the Yoemi, Wisharika, and Ramuri? Will we ever honor as a species the dream of life, dreaming its own transformation?
Gracias, amigo.
Gracias.
Gracias, Daniel, y a todo su equipo. Thank you to everybody. This has been most moving today's hearing everybody here. Are we going to let the new reader come in?
Uh-huh.
Yes. Thank you. Ciao.
So we continue. Thank you so much, Cecilia, as always, for that performance presentation, for all of your work. Cecilia reminds me, is the person I think of in my life when I feel as if I have lost, when I haven't been able to write or think or make art for a while, because she reminds me that that is the thing that I ought to be doing ahead of all of my other responsibilities, and that that she lives and breathes art all of the time, but that is not, as it might sound, a selfish act. It is one about caring about other people and about the work that they are doing, and that and many other ways, Cecilia has been a model for me. We continue with Giancarlo Wapaya from Lima, Peru. Giancarlo is an editor, a writer, a curator, a community activist, and educational facilitator. His latest book is called Gamer Over. Our son just had a diaper change. Get updates. His latest book, Gamer Over, is a counter mapping in poetry of a neighborhood in Phoenix, which puts in tension history, language, and landscape to reveal trajectories of violence and white supremacy. Wapaya's practices focus on archive, cartography, language justice, and the dialogues between poetry and the visual arts. He's the director of Cardboard House Press, a project dedicated to the publication of Latin American literature and translation to English, and the creation of bilingual spaces in the United States. As a curator, he's presented at the Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts in San Francisco, the University of Arizona Poetry Center, and the Institute of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. As translator, he's translated into Spanish work by Muriel Rukeyser, C.D. Wright, Susan Briante, Carmen Jimenez-Smith, among others. Giancarlo has been telling us this week about workshops he does in the community to lead people in cartonera, cardboard-based artist book making, in ways that value both the origins of the cartonera movement in South America that came to being out of austerity and paper shortages, while also maintaining a devotion to bringing art and artistic practice to communities that don't always receive it, and making those spaces bilingual as well. On top of all of that, he produces wonderful, beautiful books at Cardboard House Press and is an amazing poet and translator. So please welcome Giancarlo.
Hola a todos. Hello everyone. What can I say after this great presentation of Cecilia? Cecilia is also mi maestra. Thanks so much. Muchas gracias, Cecilia, por compartir tanta energía estos días, el espacio, las conversaciones. Muchas gracias. Gracias, Daniel. Thanks, Daniel, to put together this group of great poets, friends, and translators. Gracias Roque, gracias Aurelio por traer la energía de Ángela María Dávila. Fue muy conmovedor escuchar tus traducciones, la voz de Ángela María y traer esa energía, una energía que a veces olvidamos. That sometimes we forgot that kind of energy, the energy of the Latin American poets. So I will divide this presentation in two parts. The first I will read from Gamer Over, the book that Daniel mentioned. And the second part I will read my Spanish translation of The Market Wonders, that is the book by Susan Briante that was published the past year in Spain. I will you can read I will read in Spanish. You can read the translations, the English translation on the screen. The translator of these poems, of this book that also is coming in English, was made by Ryan Green, a great friend, and also Ryan lived for a while in the same neighborhood that I live in Phoenix, Arizona. And I will start with Gamer Over. The title has different meanings. The gamer, the player, el jugador. Over, que está acabado, que perdió, que el sistema pues lo hizo caer y no pudo levantarse. But also the rover, ¿no? The rover has these two different meanings. El explorador, pero también la persona que llega, el migrante. Y esta this counterposition, I think that is very important, no? Because we call to the white men that who travel an explorer, no? But the non-white people is a migrant. This is some of the maps that I made of the neighborhood where I live. The intention of this is to see the landscape as hypertext, not to be clear that where we sometimes, every time we normalize the landscape and we don't see what is hidden in the landscape. So every object that we see has a trajectory, and we come to isolate the object from the points that we see the object, and also from the points of the object has been before. I made 5 maps of this. This is the graphic of how the maps are in relation at the same space. And so I will read this poem that is Well of Fortune. This was the first poem that I wrote of this book, but this is not the first poem that you can find in the book. This is maybe the 5th section of the book. And the title is Well of Fortune, but refers to the Ferris wheel. But I like, in Spanish is Rueda de la Fortuna. I like the word fortune because it's in relation with the definition of progress. Esa rueda de puntos luminosos que habita detrás de mi casa es también una rueda de la fortuna. Se construyó en Chicago en la World's Columbian Exposition en 1893. Pero un origen no es un punto fijo. Está hecho de púas como el eje de esa rueda que celebró el 4º centenario de la colonización de América. 9 estatuas más de Colón se instalaron en los estados. El presente no es un punto aislado, pero camina vendado con una pena que le quiebra las piernas. Un destello es más preciso cuando se le coloca en relación a lo común. A veces el hecho histórico te espera como un adorno lleno de polvo, debajo una marca brillante en la superficie. La fuerza de la línea es un reflejo, se desprende. Necesita saber dónde ha rodado. Necesita saber dónde ha rodado. ¿Qué hay encima? Pero también atender al objeto que iluminaba, pero cubría. Esa rueda gira como si un imperio fuera divertido. Réplicas en tamaño real de la Niña, la Pinta y la Santa María fueron atracciones principales. La historia se marca a través de sus polvos. No salgo hace mucho, pero parece que recién he llegado. ¿Cuántas veces tengo que comenzar o debo decir sobre mi nueva vida, quiénes son cubiertos de polvo mientras entran en las cabinas? Estoy parado frente a ella, abajo, acumulando canto de su giro repetido. ¿Qué es lo que entretiene? Su escala, su volumen, su uso, lo que reproduce, tanto que pasa desapercibida. Las luces de la rueda me apuntan al cuerpo y la vivienda. El hecho histórico es una visión doble. Necesita experimentar el presente para empujar a la multitud temporal que lo ve perderse en el residuo. ¿Está el presente chocando equitativamente? El juego te engaña para simular fortuna. Muy grandioso, superabundante, majestuoso, es una sensación indescriptible la de girar a través de una órbita, a través de una órbita tan vasta en una jaula de pájaros. Desde el origen de las luces, pasajeros me miran mirarles. En campo estéril crece basura, en sentido de gracia, y se turnan tras un lento regresar. Es un ejemplo sorprendente de imprudencia e hipocresía. Todo está hecho con lucro y entretenimiento, pero la gente proyecta sus más nobles aspiraciones. Esa rueda se convirtió en el estándar con el que se compararía cada maquinaria posterior. 2. Decir primero es revisar un pronóstico. Colón es una escala. Se enviaron exploradores al sur del continente para saquear tumbas. Una vez entré y el texto era una especie de polvo para desaparecer las marcas. Desde las alturas, copias de estatuas griegas adornaron los pabellones. Una necrópolis peruana fue montada con 180 momias reales. Una vez entré y vi cómo un monster truck destruía pequeños autos vacíos. Mi casa es amplia y vacía. La casera abre y entra sin permiso cuando no estamos. El ruido del auto es proporcional a la autoestima del conductor. El texto se exhibe con una luz que cataloga su tamaño. Una vez entré y un globo aerostático ofrecía pistolas, visiones desde el aire y muebles. Una diferencia entre visualidad y visión es atender al destino del consumo, del ritual, del estudio científico, de la muerte. ¿Es la tumba peruana un entretenimiento, una comodidad? Estoy buscando algo que aún no habito. Paso tanto tiempo en esta casa y no la conozco. Phoenix es una ciudad que deja de ser más barata. Algunas amigues piden estacionar sus autos frente a mi casa para subir sus fotos en carritos y neón a Instagram. Un pabellón enorme exhibió armas de la alemana Krupp, proveedora de los nazis, con trabajadores esclavos. ¿Qué ranking debo revisar? ¿El de políticos con más inversiones en cárceles privadas? El cañón más grande del mundo le fue ofrecido al ejército de los Estados Unidos. ¿Qué es lo realmente visible del hecho histórico? ¿Y qué metáforas no se hacen polvo? 3. La World's Columbian Exposition fue un antecedente de la Feria de Armas, un monumento más largo avistado desde su destino y una atracción en la que seres humanos fueron exhibidos como en un zoológico. Fair significa buen viento para los barcos y abierto a la vista, pero al agregarle skin designa la piel blanca. Según la historiadora Nancy Egan, entre 1888 y 1930, más de 25.000 indígenas fueron llevadas en barcos a ferias alrededor del mundo. Decir para anclar Decir para anclar es decir qué costas atravesó el lenguaje. Las maquinarias mueven, fuerzan los cuerpos. El buen viento me causa alergia, me pica el rostro. La rueda se detiene para recoger más pasajeros. ¿Desde dónde miras el monumento? ¿Desde una curaduría de líneas impersonales o desde un aparente discurso agradable pero engañoso? El buen viento, por designio especial del cielo, lleva la rueda de la fortuna a otra feria y a otra. Desde la jaula se balancea la vista, una multitud mira a otra multitud en cautiverio, una multitud participa en el tráfico de personas. Un coyote urbano sube a mi cerca, mira las luces, unos helicópteros hacen su ronda nocturna, sobre mi barrio luces, sobre la página quisiera acostarme y disfrutar del amor. La vida florece hasta la llegada del fuego. La multitud en exhibición enfermó, algunos murieron, otros pasaron a formar parte de colecciones en museos o de zoológicos locales. La jaula hecha de archivo, de quien me mira, se sigue balanceando. No quiero ser parte de la exhibición, pero me piden que negocie qué hago aquí. Luego de la Feria Mundial, la rueda se dinamitó y terminó vendida como chatarra. Decir pronósticos sin el detrás, donde el coyote avista y busca desecho. Las cenizas de su inventor fueron abandonadas en una funeraria, porque nadie pagó el saldo que se les debía. Una vez entré y había una imagen de Colón adolescente sentado frente al mar, mirando al horizonte. 4. Las ferias mundiales cultivaron la idea de cómo se ve una civilización y programaron su idea de prosperidad. La jaula es el penúltimo archivo. Las familias trabajaban, les exigían por rituales en campos cercados, desde una ventana, de una choza simulada, la civilización veía el espacio íntimo de una mujer filipina o las niñas sin cages en los centros de detención en Texas. ¿Puedes notar desde qué distancia miras mis palabras? Desde este espacio, en mi oficina en Phoenix, veo en mi pantalla los planos generales que publicó el Servicio de Aduanas y Protección Fronteriza. Desde este puente, Santa Fe, entre Juárez y El Paso, a las 3 a.m., veo desde arriba a familias envueltas en papel aluminio y ordenadas en filas, mientras un oficial las llama por un número mal pronunciado en español. Desde esta carretera de autopartes vemos entrar un bus sin ventanas al centro de detención de Tornillo. Les gritamos porque sabemos que hay niñas dentro. Alrededor vemos unos globos en forma de corazón y algunas personas tomándose fotos con letreros solidarios. Desde aquí no vemos a los niños, pero sabemos que están dentro de las carpas. Nuestra capacidad de testimonio ha aumentado a un ritmo desproporcionado en relación a nuestra capacidad de cambio. El papel aluminio que les sirve como manta sobre el concreto se arruga en mi ventana. Los niños absorben polvo metálico y no terminan de proyectarse en la rueda en el desierto donde la piel crece y se descascara. ¿Cuántas veces han intercambiado las palabras cacería, secuestro y detención en esta prosperidad? ¿Qué imagen de ese niño, la madre, padre, la tuya, ha sido proyectada en este billboard? Mientras esa rueda sigue siendo fortuna y abundancia. Gracias. Also, I need to say that some of the words and the articulation of this poem are not mine. At the end of the book, I have a huge note about the poems, who are the humanity of the text. This in the way that Cristina Rivera Garza explained in The Restless Deaths about the concept of disappropriation. Now I would like to invite Susan Briante, other of our maestras.
So Carla and Susan are going to collaborate for this next bit. and then we'll hear some of Susan's work as well. Susan Briante is author of several books of poetry, including Pioneers in the Study of Motion, Utopia Minus, and The Market Wonders, translated to Spanish by Giancarlo Bobaya. Susan's most recent book is the amazing collection of essays, though I don't know, I think they're poems too, and poem essays on immigration, archives, aesthetics, and the state, which won the Poetry Foundation's Pegasus Award for Poetry Criticism in 2021. That book is called Defacing the Monument. And Susan is in addition to being a poet, is a translator, lived in Mexico City for many years, and I believe Susan and I first met when we were both involved in Mandorla, the great publication, which was, again, a sort of model of bilingual activism and art for many of us in this room. Susan has received grants and awards from the MacDowell Colony, the Academy of American Poets, among others. Susan teaches in the University of Arizona's MFA program and directs the Southwest Field Studies in Writing program, which expands dialogues on issues related to the border by sending creative writing students to engage in research and residencies in the borderlands. So, welcome, Susan.
I'll say a few words in a minute, but I think we should just go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm reading. I'll read a little bit from the first section of the book called "Towards the Poetics of the Tao." Every day has a number attached to it. Great additions, subtractions. This is not just an aesthetic problem. See Ashbery. There's a natural impulse toward the boundedness of closure, end quote. The bell rings, trading stops, but the world is unfinished, see Hegelian. Both the rivers and their banks are moving. The poem remains incomplete, the trading day long over. I do not believe if I follow the Tao, I will find nirvana, but I often check the numbers, sit for meditation. Even when we think we are at the end, there are decimals.
Cada día tiene un número asignado. Grandes adiciones, sustracciones. No es solo un problema estético, ver Ashbery. Hay un impulso natural hacia los límites del cierre. La campana suena, la transacción se detiene, pero el mundo está inacabado. Tanto los ríos como sus orillas se mueven. El poema queda incompleto. El día de negociación ha terminado. No creo que siguiendo al Tao vaya a encontrar el nirvana, pero con frecuencia reviso los números y me siento a meditar. Incluso cuando pensamos que estamos al final, hay decimales.
When the Buddha touched his finger to the ground at the moment of enlightenment, all the leaves fell from the Bodhi tree. It's February 10th, 10:04 in the morning. The Tao falls 12,194. The present poetic strive towards total awareness, incessant recording. Ravenous as a black walnut tree, roots sucking at the sore line, the Tao touches everything. The taste of our water, color of our sky, torque of our engines. It's February 10th, 10:15 in the morning. The Tao at 12,203 is rising. The poet, like the trash tree, uses all of it. A poem moves as does the Tao, influenced by a variety of factors and events, mergers, oil spills, revolutions, suffering. Sometimes what does not move tells the story. I like poems that go to prisons and coal mining towns. I like poems that act as archive, or a view towards Elizabeth Street. I admire circuitry and cosmology. I write with a power industry dictionary on the bookshelf behind my desk, a copy of the King James, a guide to Texas trees. Poems should evidence some degree of control, but poets should be a little volatile. The poem is a high-risk investment, a long-term commitment. Like a big, dirty city, it should make you feel a little uncomfortable. It's February 10th, 1:11 in the afternoon. The Dow falls to 12,197. The poet wants to remind the Dow that the bird has something to teach it about falling and song.
This is the second time that we.
Okay.
It is the second time that we read this, right?
Yeah.
Cuando el Buda tocó el suelo con su dedo, en el momento de la iluminación, todas las hojas cayeron del árbol de Bodhi. 10:04 de la mañana del 10 de febrero. El Dao cae a 12.194. Esta poética se esfuerza por alcanzar la conciencia total, la grabación constante. Voraz, como un nogal negro que aspira con sus raíces la tubería del desagüe, el Dao toca todo: el sabor de nuestra agua, el color de nuestro cielo, la fuerza de torsión de nuestros motores. 10:15 de la mañana del 10 de febrero, con 12.203, el Dao va en aumento. El poeta, como el árbol de la basura, lo usa todo. El poema, al igual que el Dao, se mueve influenciado por una variedad de factores y eventos, fusiones, derrames de petróleo, revoluciones, sufrimientos. A veces lo que no se mueve cuenta la historia. Me gustan los poemas que van a las prisiones y a pueblos con minas de carbón. Me gustan los poemas que se comportan como un archivo o una vista de la Elizabeth Street. Admiro los circuitos y la cosmología. Escribo con un diccionario de la industria eléctrica del estante detrás de mi escritorio, una copia de la Biblia del rey Jacobo, una guía de los árboles de Texas. Los poemas deben demostrar cierto grado de control, pero los poetas deben ser un poco volubles. El poema es una inversión de alto riesgo, un compromiso a largo plazo. Una ciudad grande y sucia debería hacerte sentir un poco incómodo. 1:11 de la tarde del 10 de febrero, el Dao cae a 12.197. El poeta quiere recordarle al Dao que el pájaro tiene algo que enseñarle sobre la caída y la canción.
The theoretical physicist says, quote, "I've always wanted to find the rules that governed everything." The theoretical physicist says, quote, "Deep laws emerge." I have a friend who asks about truth in poetry. Whenever he does, I want to send him a valentine on musty pink paper. He lives in a mid-century modern house with mid-century modern furniture carefully culled from vintage stores and eBay. He owns an old mahogany stereo cabinet jacked up so you can listen to his iPod through it. That's the kind of truth in which I'm interested, plus the silence, plus the static. Charles Olson writes, quote, "No event is not penetrated or in intersection or collision with an eternal event," end quote. To which I offer this corollary: no event is not permitted, no event is not penetrated in intersection or collision with the stock market. I wish more poets would write about money.
El físico teórico dice: siempre he querido encontrar las reglas que rigen todo. El físico teórico dice: leyes profundas emergen. Tengo un amigo que pregunta sobre la verdad en la poesía. Cada vez que lo hace, quiero enviarle una tarjeta de San Valentín en un papel rosa mohoso. Vive en una casa moderna de mediados del siglo, con muebles modernos de mediados de siglo cuidadosamente seleccionados de eBay y de tiendas vintage. Es dueño de un antiguo gabinete estéreo de caoba, con conexiones para que puedas escuchar un iPod. Este es el tipo de verdad que me interesa. A más silencio, más estática. Charles Olson escribe: ningún evento no es penetrado en intersección o colisión con un evento eterno, a lo que ofrezco este colorario. Ningún evento no es penetrado en intersección o colisión con el mercado de valores. Ojalá más poetas escribieran sobre el dinero.
Farid rests in child's pose on the living room floor. Gianna sleeps in her crib. You could tell this poem was written a while ago. The Tao closes its eyes. In the park across our street, nothing blooms. Winter grass, the color of a lioness. My warrior, my tree. After the fall of Mubarak, reporters talk to tailors on Cairo's streets. They broadcast a video of doctors who treated the revolution's wounded. People write congratulatory notes on their lab coat sleeves. We love the look of magic marker on white cloth, but no one tells us how much money we've sent the dictator over the years, how many more receive our checks. There are bigger equations, larger alphabets, scripts from which I want to unwrite myself. In 1994, the artist Mark Lombardi began working on a series of spindled drawings that graph relationships between businesses and government elites, tracing paths of financial meltdowns and mergers, shady deals and convenient bedfellows. The poem, as well, can spin webs. The archive is wide. The poem accepts yellow leaves, guide stars, a crop failing, my milk coming in. We need the aerial photograph and microscopic slides, as well as something beyond our personal viewfinders. Not a ball and chain of cause and effect, but a tendency toward pattern, implication, investigations of grief and ecstasy. The artist Mark Lombardi worked in pencil. The poem and the stock market welcome speculation.
Farid descansa en la postura del niño en el piso de la sala. Yana duerme en su cuna. El Dao cierra los ojos. En el parque, al otro lado de la calle, nada florece. Hierba de invierno, del color de una leona. Mi guerrera, mi árbol. Después de la caída de Mubarak, los reporteros conversan con sastres en las calles del Cairo. Transmiten un video de los médicos que trataron a los heridos de la revolución. La gente escribe notas de gratitud en las mangas de sus batas de laboratorio. Nos encanta cómo se ve el marcador en la tela blanca, pero nadie nos dice cuánto dinero le hemos enviado al dictador en los últimos años. ¿Cuántos más reciben nuestros cheques? Hay ecuaciones más grandes, alfabetos más extensos, guiones de los que me quiero desescribir. En 1994, el artista Mark Lombardi comenzó a trabajar en una serie de esquemas de uso que graficaban las relaciones entre las élites empresariales y gubernamentales, trazando caminos de derrumbes financieros y fusiones, acuerdos turbios y cómodos arreglos de cama. Un poema a su vez hila los entramados. El archivo es amplio. El poema acepta hojas amarillas, estrellas guía, un cultivo malogrado, mi leche saliendo. Necesitamos la fotografía aérea y las diapositivas microscópicas, así como algo más allá de nuestros visores personales. No es una bola ni una cadena de causa y efecto, sino una tendencia hacia el modelo, su implicancia, las investigaciones del dolor y el éxtasis. El artista Mark Lombardi trabajó a lápiz. El poema y el mercado de valores dan la bienvenida a la especulación.
I'm just so grateful, Daniel, Angelica, for all the work you did to help bring us here. I'm grateful for all of you for being here. It has been a long afternoon, so stretch, relax. I'm going to give you a little roadmap of what I'm going to read. I love this room because so many times poetry readings happen in spaces that feel like tombs. You know what I mean? And we can look outside, so stretch, look outside, do whatever you need to do to kind of make yourself comfortable. All of this work is work that's interpenetrated by the work of other folks. I mean, it is like such, Giancarlo makes my poems better by putting them into Spanish, and I hear them differently. I'm going to quote a bunch of folks here in what I'm going to read. It's a kind of speculative map of resistance. I've been thinking about the idea of inheritance, and I've been thinking about the story as a commodity, which Giancarlo's work also sort of touched upon. And I also want to thank Fareed, who's letting me use some of his family stories in this particular work. So it's a kind of a lyric essay. As I said, there's a beautiful outdoors for us to look at. I have some images to slide in and out as you need, stretch and move about. It's been a long day. I'm just grateful for your attention. When I first started visiting the US-Mexico border, an aid worker showed me the large Ziploc bags labeled Department of Homeland Security that were given to deportees, in which they carried whatever they happened to have on them when they were picked up by Border Patrol or ICE agents. One asylum seeker told me about a journey across 11 countries to reach Arizona. Another talked about the deportations proceedings that began when they were picked up in the United States for shoplifting diapers for their baby. I worry about the hundreds of stories that end with a bag labeled Department of Homeland Security. What kind of inheritance can fit in a Ziploc bag? When my mother-in-law moved into a nursing home months before she died, my husband needed to clear out her mobile home. Fareed's mother, Zoila, and his aunt immigrated from Peru to the United States, faced with the threat that Fareed's father would kidnap him away from Zoila's custody. When writing about this, Fareed has described his family as exiles from, quote, the country of men. As Fareed worked to clear out the mobile home, his mother kept telling him to sell her Yadro figurines, that they would be worth something. Throughout graduate school and after graduation, Fareed sent money home to pay his mother's rent. Once her chronic heart failure made it impossible for her to live on her own, Zoila was admitted to the same assisted living facility where she had worked after she left a well-paying job in Peru, overstaying her tourist visa in Southern California, gaining legal residency, and then eventually becoming a citizen under Reagan's amnesty program. Fareed was able to sell his mother's Yadro figurines to her former boss at the nursing home for a few $100s, several $100s less than the something his mother thought they might be worth. In the web of capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy, at a time of unprecedented economic disparity and enormous intergenerational wealth transfers, what kind of sense can we make out of this kind of inheritance? The artist and scholar Ariel Aisha Azoulay proposes individuals should gain immigration rights wherever the artifacts and objects that have been plundered from their national or ethnic patrimony are held. I imagine every piece of Oaxacan pottery or beaded Nigerian wall art captured in US museums or hung on the walls of the wealthy, functioning as visas for the migrants I might find today waiting to plead asylum in long lines under the shadow of the US-Mexico border wall. Immigration rights based on artistic patrimony might offer one possible subversion of the imperial logics that govern our understanding of heritage, artifact, and archive. I envision others. Since 2020, I've worked with artists, scholars, and migration advocates to record and preserve the oral histories of formerly detained migrants and asylum seekers. We listen on WhatsApp calls to formerly incarcerated migrants tell us about a lack of medical care in US immigration detention, about racist Border Patrol agents. One shares what it was like to be in detention in Arizona the night when the child separation policies rolled out. Quote, "I've never heard screams like I did that night," she says. Journalists, scholars, and activists collect these kinds of stories with the hope that they will change policy, and often they do not. If they cannot change policies, at least not at this moment, can these histories produce value, legal or economic, for the migrants who author them, in the wake and outside of colonization and imperial plunder? With what kind of equation do we calculate the value of these trauma narratives? Zoila and her sister owned their mobile home, but not the land on which it stood. For months after she died, Fareed continued to pay rent on the land until he could sell the home. To inherit a mobile home, but not the land it rests upon, makes a metaphor for the condition of the immigrant in the United States, for migration under capitalism, settler colonialism, and white supremacy. Oral histories from migrants and asylum seekers formerly detained in Arizona form part of a heritage, a patrimony, reflecting the impacts of US politics and policies, revealing the reasons that drive migrants to seek asylum and the conditions they face once detained. Conditions designed to remain outside the US public's view, behind a veil of policy stitched in the name of security. Can we envision these migrants as authors, rather than workers handling some kind of raw material in the form of their oral history, from which some of us, as researchers, journalists, policymakers, can extract what evidence we need? Can we protect the stories of migrants and asylum seekers from potential exploitation, their trauma, some mineral upon which we construct a book contract, an academic career, while leveraging their value in alternative potential economies? Can this value offer them expanded rights and opportunities? I shudder at the very equations of value that I am proposing, but the less than logic with which we view migrants under the laws of the United States must end. A partial list of my inheritances. A blackened metal scissor that belonged to my paternal great-grandfather, an immigrant from southern Italy. A bowl from my paternal grandmother's kitchen. Migraines, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. My mother's gold rope chain. Her fear of small spaces, of men. Whiteness. Quote, "Learning to disown what one owns at the expense of others is to take part in unlearning imperialism," writes Azoulay. In her book, Ordinary Notes, Christina Sharp reflects on the images of lynchings at the US Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. Sharp asks her readers to consider the white people featured in these photographs as spectators. She writes, quote, "What if the project that white people took on was to locate each of these white people who appear in the crowds of those lynchings, those who pose for photographs, and those others who appear in backgrounds? What if their project was to identify them and their families and to link their present circumstances to the before of the photographs and the after? I imagine an unfurling of a list of transactions, bills of sales on land, homes, and businesses, calculations of loss of income for families and individuals. Equations of atrocities will never be balanced. Still, I want to calculate the wealth generated by my parents when they purchased a home in the suburbs with the help of mortgage insurance specifically designed to aid the white middle class and support segregation, versus the wealth lost through declining property values in the majority Black city of Newark, New Jersey, which my family left after a racial uprising in the 1960s. These scribble calculations fill notebooks, write themselves into my home, my career, my family. Azoulay theorizes about the rights of those forced to be perpetrators. The designation US citizen, another inheritance, binds me to the outright evil committed under the guise of nation and its interest. Azoulay writes, quote, "To refuse to be complicit, to claim that justice is due even after a long time, is a right that should be shared. It comes with a right not to, the right that reverses the conditions that perpetuated the suspension of justice," end quote. As I write this in early 2024, US protesters barricade highways, block bridges, halt trains. Others crowd city council meetings across the US to push for a ceasefire in Gaza. Azoulay writes, quote, "To be home in a shared world is the ability to make reparations to someone for a wrong done to them, to see them and oneself righted." Can you list the crimes in which you refuse to be a perpetrator? The acts you refute committed in your name? How will you reject your complicity? Would you shun your inheritances, burn the deeds? What would you gain? The immigration of my white ancestors at the turn of the 20th century was markedly different from the immigration of Farid and his family in the 1980s, which was markedly different from the experiences of the migrants who line up along the wall in the Sonoran Desert to wait for sometimes days for an opportunity to plead asylum, only to spend months in immigration detention. In her breakfront cabinet, my mother had a Lladró figurine known as, quote, the Japanese flower arranger. Many statuettes on the Lladró website list for upwards of $500 to $750, but resell for $75, some for only $10 or $20 on eBay. My mother's Japanese flower arranger figure would sell for $70 today. How my Italian-American mother, granddaughter of immigrants, came to want that particular statue is another story of colonization. She too thought her Lladró might be worth something someday. For some of us whose parents transitioned from the immigrant working class, our inheritances, Lladró, Hummel, Lenox, Wedgwood, crowd shelves in secondhand shops. If we're lucky, a home is inherited. And after it's paid off, the proceeds might go to pay back a student loan or put a down payment on a house of our own. Despite whatever gains our immigrant ancestors may have made, we have inherited a place in a chain of wealth accumulation at the cost of others. A life that is a boot at someone else's throat, a missile crashing into the hospital, an impossible equation. On the back of the box in which Zoila and her sister kept a porcelain nativity set, I noticed a series of calculations written in pencil. The set had come to Peru from Syria. After Zoila fled Lima, after she found work in the US as a nursing home attendant, after I met and fell in love with her son, then gave birth to her only grandchild, the nativity became part of our makeshift Christmas tradition, more cultural than religious. To me, the cigar box is as important as the porcelain figurines of Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus. The box represents both the quotidian and its ritual disruption, scarcity and hope, the beauty of that which is improvised, like a meal at the end of a pay period, or a holiday celebration in a second language, another kind of heritage altogether. The inheritance of my citizenship implicates me in particular patrimonies. The wall, the guards, the guns, the surveillance blimp, the open-air camps and remote prisons, the cell phone app that migrants must use to petition for asylum. My citizenship means bombs are my legacy, images of wailing mothers and fathers, my legacy, mass graves, bloodstains, my legacy. In late 2023, US newspapers publish images of single men or small huddles of families standing along the border wall near Lukeville, Arizona, or Jacinda Hot Springs, California. Reporters tell us that some of the thousands there have been waiting for days for the opportunity to appear before a US Border Patrol or customs agent to plead asylum. They carry nothing but, quote, the clothes on their backs or a small knapsack of belongings, the newspapers tell me. Left everything behind is an awful cliche that leaves a hole where a person should stand. To think about what kind of inheritance can fit in a plastic Ziploc bag might be to think in the equations of the states. The stories of the migrants I meet with do not end with a Ziploc bag. Every recipe and remedy, all the years of study and each academic degree, every skill, hack, and fix they bring with them constitutes a cultural patrimony, a portable archive, a possible world. Perhaps instead of inheritance and patrimony, we should think about our responsibility to those we live with and to those who will come after us. Can I attend to that past and its influence on the present? Make it my project, in the words of Sharp? Can I leave an inheritance for which my child might be proud, become an ancestor worthy of her memory? For those of us who benefit from white supremacy and imperialism need to invoke our rights to disavow, to block the highway, close the bridge, halt the trains. We cannot awake every day to the unbearable calculations of the murders committed in our names. We need to calculate what inheritances we can release to render something we can live in and with, because we cannot keep living like this. To inherit a mobile home but not the land it rests upon seems a fitting metaphor for the untenable condition of settler colonialism. Brings to mind what I saw on the side of the abandoned Whiting Motel in Gray Mountain, Arizona. The white block graffiti painted by Native American artists that reads, "American rent is due." It's a fact and a reminder of the many calculations necessary. Thank you.
Gracias, gracias. Es como una confirmación de todo lo que está pasando, ver poetas trabajando en colectivo, porque los poetas trabajan casi siempre como solos en su obra. Entonces, vernos trabajando en colectivo es una cosa bella. No quiero hacer una pregunta, quería hacer ¿cómo se dice eso? Cuando alguien le dice algo bonito a alguien.
¿Elogio?
Sí, no era la palabra, pero
Cumplido.
Cumplido, sí, pero elogio. ¿Por qué? Porque es importante eso para nosotros, y sobre todo los artistas y las minorías, que somos la mayoría, necesitamos que... Entonces, quería decirte que cuando te oigo una honestidad bien, bueno, la honestidad es cruda en el tema, pero como bien serena. Entonces, esto no es un poema, obviamente, mientras te oía, y esa honestidad serena me hace pensarte a ti como un altoparlante de los ancestros. de todas esas generaciones que han venido por ahí, los invisibles necesarios para sostener esta feria ridícula e hipnótica que es la psicosis imperialista, ¿ves? Entonces tu mirada de lo importante nos importa porque despierta la conciencia. Eso te quería decir.
Muchas gracias, Aurelio. Wow, qué hermosas palabras. Estoy feliz de haberte pues transmitido. Pues sí, pues
en ti.
No sé si realmente lo puedo encarnar tal responsabilidad, ¿no? pero muchas gracias. Gracias. El respeto y la admiración es mutua.
A veces uno no se da cuenta de cuánto uno brilla y el de afuera lo ve. Gracias.
Gracias a ti. Pues tú sí, ustedes sí demostraron esta encarnación de los ancestros, ¿no? Eso fue bien clara, ¿no? No, sí.
Pero yo tengo que decir que yo no esperaba eso, o sea que, porque, bueno, sí, Cecilia, eso siempre está ahí en su vista un poco, pero ustedes dos hablaron de inheritances. I'll switch to English a little bit. Aurelio was talking about the powerful ways in which Giancarlo presented a kind of poetics of the ancestors of the past, and with a powerful serenity, and then Giancarlo commented on the ways in which Roque and Aurelio were also doing that in their performance of Ángela María Dávila's work. And I think Susan was also talking about inheritances and the past, and then Giancarlo, I was thinking about the moment in one of your poems about the World Columbian Exposition, and again about artifacts stolen, and I know that you've been thinking a lot about that, and so maybe I'll end up a question somehow, but I think it's more to say that I did not sort of expect that that theme might have arisen up. But Giancarlo, I know you went to the Field Museum yesterday, and you've been thinking a lot about these things, and how's it sort of, ¿cómo influencia tú lo que estás escribiendo? How's it fitting into your writing?
Yeah, because while I was doing the research for this book, I found this old catalog of the World Columbian Exposition that I found this catalog at a vintage bookstore in a small town in Vermont, and I knew for that catalog that the World Columbian Exposition in its ethnography building, they exhibit a Peruvian necropolis with 180 corpses from Peru that they stole from Peru. And this book, I talk a little bit about that in this part of the book, when I put in relation the Arizona State Fair with the World Columbian Exposition, thinking about how the Ferris wheel has contributed with the normalization of the empire, of the enterprise, the colonial enterprise, and the space of recreation. And they say objects as the Ferris wheel have said us that the empire is fun, no? The empire is fun. So this is the line in Gamer Over, and this book also opened a new investigation about what happened with these objects, how these objects, because we are talking about the human remains, corpses, and also hundreds of objects. What was the trajectory of these objects, no? And also how are circulating at this moment in the United States. And mostly of them were to the Field Museum. They have courses inside the museum in archive of corpses, yeah, and many objects. And I would like to map the trajectory and also the traces of the documents that were part of this trajectory to talk about how these objects are circulating, but also how the anthropology was funded in the United States. Because the curator of this exhibition in the World Columbian Exposition made the first dissertation of anthropology in Harvard. So this event and other events around this funded anthropology as a study field, and this is a clear operation of the white supremacy. How the white supremacy funded the anthropology and also put narrative over histories, over populations and cultures. And then, thanks to this dissertation and the curation of this exhibit, the curator gained a lot of power in the United States. Then he was a curator of the Field Museum, because the Field Museum was funded for this time. I think that it was a little bit after the World Columbian Exposition, and also the curator repeat that kind of practice in the United States with indigenous people, remains, ancestors. So it's interesting to see how was the repetition of this kind of practice till now. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of materiality, because I think the two of you are doing it in this really, really interesting way, I want to pick on two things one thing that you said, which is, which is every object has a trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And then something, Susan, that you said, which is nothing but the clothes on their backs. And I want to hear the two of you, I don't really have a great question, but I want to hear the two of you talk about that tension between materiality and shed, and leaving things behind over time. Whether how that you're talking about it as it manifests in urban design, you're talking about it as it manifests in sort of the irony of nothing but the clothes on their backs, and they're carrying all these other things. I just want to put that out there for the two of you to discuss.
I come at all of this work with an interest in the trajectories of documentary poetics, and I think one of the things that came out of the work that I was doing was what are all the things that aren't accounted, all the many things that aren't accounted for in the archive, right? And even if we think about the newspapers, the reporting on migrant situation at the border, which as another one of these guide stars for me, the activist Dora Rodriguez, who runs the organization Salva Visión, explains there's not a crisis at the border, there's an opportunity for the US to show who we really are, and we're doing it one way or another, although we wish, with her, I wish we were doing it as a nation in a better way. But yeah, there's all of this stuff that gets left out of the ways in which the representations of migrants and their trajectories are described, and one of them is the sense that they're coming here with nothing, which is absurd. Of course there's this material shedding and a need, right? There are material needs that have to be met, but the idea that that the folks who come here don't have anything is a real disservice. It is a long entrenched narrative, I think, in our country that allows a kind of, when we want a kind of Statue of Liberty, save, bring us, you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, masses, saviorism. That's also who's getting, who is that called to bring us? I could take apart that whole phrase, right? And who are these masses? I want to think about how we're responsible in some ways too for producing them. But yeah, I mean, I want to really push against a lot of those ideas of representation of what's not being accounted for either in archives or in the more mainstream narrativizations of migrant experience. Also being careful that I cannot inhabit that experience, right? Which is in part why, you know, and it's not without its own complications, but I'm trying to work in a very ethical way with the creation of a very ethical archive that allows migrants to share their experiences. And we're trying to set up all kinds of guidelines and rules for how that archive can be used and the rights that the migrants have to retracting, to keeping their stuff out there, to amending what they're writing. And I can talk a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking when I started Game Rover, I was reading Queer Phenomenology by Sarah Ahmed and thinking about how the objects that we see around us are in relation with us, or why that object that we see, someone put that object in our field of vision. So thinking about the behinds of the things, you know, what is related with the front, you know, why we are seeing this front and what is hiding, you know, in the terms of the Ferris wheel. So it's a huge thing, you know, and this object was hiding many things about this evolution of the empire in the.
Me fascina el espacio en blanco en tu trabajo y en general, ¿no? Y ayer estábamos hablando de son, también pienso, ¿no?, en cómo el espacio en blanco en la página puede hacer cosas tan diferentes, por ejemplo, en un texto futurista o un texto como son, están haciendo cosas casi opuestas, ¿no? Y quería saber un poquito más, ¿verdad? No tienes que contestarme porque es poesía, pero quizás que hablaras un poquito sobre cómo visualizas el espacio en blanco. I can repeat that question in English, you know. Basically, I was saying that blank space can do very different things in different texts, and I'm interested in knowing, for example, it can do something in a futurist text, do something totally different in a poem-length song, and I was asking Giancarlo what they, if they were willing to, you know, how they saw blank space working in their poems.
Yeah, pues la más direct response about this is respiration. I think that this is very important in my poems. A highlighter. And pues the rhythm of the body, no? The body is also telling to you how to, when you need to stop, to make a pause. And it's interesting also the flow of the rhythm of my poems, because part of my background is hip hop. In my neighborhood in Peru, in Lima, was one of the neighborhoods where the hip hop in Lima was born. So I was surrounded by hip hop. So that is the rhythm. Was really nice for me, no? Because it gave me a rhythm, a different kind of rhythm. And I learned this when I was a child, so it was part of my body.
Sí. Ya que oí esa y él habla del ritmo, yo tenía un cumplido pregunta para Susan. Porque oigo tu poesía y no entiendo todo el poema cuando está en inglés, pero tuve la oportunidad de entonces después oírlo. Es una maravilla, vamos a seguir haciendo esto. Pero mientras no entendía, mientras estabas en inglés, porque tú lo pensaste en inglés, ¿verdad? Entonces, tiene tu poesía, es una melodía como firme y como segura, que es como te lleva al espectador como un soplo de entendimiento de lo que estás exponiendo. Entonces no todos los poetas, hay grandes poetas que cuando leen no te llega, pero no es el caso. O sea, la pregunta también es si tú técnicamente estás consciente de toda esa musicalidad que tú tienes y si la trabajas de alguna forma específica a conciencia o si es algo intuitivo y algo, una mezcla de algo.
A lo mejor es una mezcla, ¿verdad? Y también había, o sea, estaba yo esperando que la pregunta iba a ser la diferencia, porque yo lo escuché, es la primera vez que estoy leyendo el ensayo en frente de un público, y hay el ritmo y la certeza que yo creo que lo estás pointing out en fue porque estaba escribiendo algo casi, bueno, a lo mejor como la mitad del proyecto que fue este libro, y estaba consciente de intentar de escribir un como pseudo manifiesto, no? Like I wanted to, I'll code switch a little, but I mean, you can let me know. Like, yo quería escribir un manifiesto sobre cuál sería una poética relacionada al mercado de valores, ¿no? Ya con o sea, cuando escribo yo de poder, de cuestiones de raza, sociales, es imposible tener o sea, para mí tener también certeza. O sea, estoy un poco en lo que decía Cecilia ayer, the unknowing, que yo creo que por lo menos para mí es productiva. En un momento tal vez cambia, pero es necesario también, porque no es que yo sé, o sea, es un poco especulativa, un poco pensar, intentar, sentir, y por eso, o sea, yo creo que formalmente no puede ser la misma que la poesía en ese sentido, en ese momento. Yeah. The point was like there was a question about my like there was a kind of like certainty or rhythmic maybe certainty is a way to say like what was happening in the poems, and I was saying that I wrote the piece that I read was written at about the halfway point of writing the book, and the project and I was also conscious of trying to write sort of a pseudo manifesto for what a poetry in relation to the stock market would be. So I could inhabit that kind of the language and the certainty of a manifesto. The essay that I read is the first time I've read it out loud, and I'm writing about race and power, and I can't I think even if I had a certainty, and there are moments where I feel things that I feel very certain about, I don't want to step into that kind of, or I'm trying not to step into, or I don't feel like I can step into that same kind of manifesto certainty, because I'm speculating, I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure something out for myself in a limited position, in a positionality that maybe is limited to my own positionality, and that I'm trying to sort of inhabit and understand. And of course I didn't translate, I went further, but that's what happens. And that's why translation is so good, because you like say it in another language and then word comes out. I don't know, I'll stop there.
So let's take one more question. I know you had your hand up too.
Sure, thank you. Susan, my question's for you especially, because I thought something that you said was in conversation with what I understood Roque to be making, and Roque, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember this morning you said that once you translate something, it's out of your hands, it's sort of a loss of control, and that seems to be in contrast with what you were saying, Susan, that you want to have sort of some control or some ethics around how the migrant stories get used in your oral history project. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the ethics, or how you at that project try to sort of think about how the stories are going to be used.
It's still very much in process. And in terms of that project, like I absolutely agree with you, like once we write something, it's out of our hands.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. La pregunta es sobre
Yeah.
la ética de cómo está usando las historias de los migrantes
Yeah.
en el proyecto que ella está haciendo.
Yeah. I'll start in English. I think I'll start in English and we'll see how we go. It's still in process. I mean, the first thing was to make sure that we're working with migrants. We work with the Florence Immigration Rights and Refugee Project, which provides legal services to migrants. So they reach out to folks, and we make sure that the folks understand the process, understand what we're doing, consent to being used, and there's different kind of levels of consent they can have. So the first is just making sure the people who are sharing their stories are fully aware of where they're going to be used, then at this point, we're also trying to come up with, and this is where I mentioned I'm invoking Dora Rodriguez, but where Dora comes in, Dora Rodriguez, who works with an organization called Salva Visión and is sort of on our board of advisors right now, has also brought clients to us who want to share their stories, migrated from El Salvador in the 80s and what had a very traumatic migration experience. And had that experience, plastered on newspapers, novelized by people. And like one of the last things she said to me the first time we met was like, "Oh, I hope that guy enjoyed all the money he made off of my story," right? Like, so we're trying to. I'm planning this semester to do an interview with her, but also trying to come up with some guidelines for how a story can be used. Those stories can be used. I mean, I feel like there needs to be additional kind of forms of consent, and it's a really complicated, honestly, I'm still not entirely, and that's sort of what I'm gesturing towards. On one hand, if you speak to migrant rights activists, they'll tell you these stories can be really important in helping people understand the conditions migrants face, helping people to attach and feel empathy. But they also get turned into this kind of commodity. And so how can we use them in ways that are empowering? So some of what I'm saying there I think is meant to just be provocative, but it's also this is when we talk about the materiality, lack of materiality, right? One's narrative is an important thing to be able to keep control over, right? So understanding that these narratives can have a kind of value to change things. How can we be sure? It's complicated, but that's the kind of things we're trying to work out. One thing is to provide access to people, but also to provide some kind of guidelines that help them use that work in ways that are responsible. And just briefly and in short, when my previous book, Defacing the Monument, which also deals with sort of migration issues, I work for small presses. It's not like I made a lot of money off of it, but I also gave money. I promised half of my royalties, and I gave half of my Poetry Foundation prize money to migrant rights organizations. That's not a perfect solution either, but I think there's also material things that we can do, those of us who work and make work off of these kinds of stories that come from other people. Thank you.